Some prefer the comforts of home, the familiar, the routine, the certain and secure. They enjoy a nice warm fire to come home to, cupboards filled with food, a soft pillow for their head. But not everyone. There are those who prefer something different. They choose to dare, to adventure, to go places no one has ever gone before, to endure the hardships, to overcome the obstacles, and to reap the rewards. They are the explorers, the visionaries, the mighty. They are the brave. And they call out to us, braving the new world.
One of those adventurers and one of those brave souls, at least in my opinion, is a guy by the name of Phil Rosenthal. Anybody ever heard of Phil Rosenthal? He was actually a writer for the Everybody Loves Raymond sitcom back in the day, but he has a show on Netflix now called Somebody Feed Phil. Anybody ever seen the show Somebody Feed Phil? Wow, my wife has seen this, and this is why I know about it, but it's on Netflix if you're looking for a show. Netflix, right? Looking for a show. And here's the basic idea. This Phil guy is very funny, very entertaining, and very engaging. He goes to various places in the world and tests and tries their food. And so, foreign countries everywhere, and the show is all about this. He goes in and he tries this, and he makes the most hilarious faces as he's trying this food, whether or not he likes it. Now, maybe that doesn't sound all that entertaining to you. You ought to try the show, Somebody Feed Phil. So far, this is not going well. But anyhow, the point is, I don't want to be Phil because I don't like all kinds of weird foods. Basically, if you give me a burger and fries, I'm good, and I can do that every night for a week, for a month, maybe for my life. I don't know. But I'm not that adventurous when it comes to food. But I do wish I could be like Phil in traveling to all different places in the world. Because I love to adventure. I love to try new things. I love to go new places. And honestly, I haven't been very many places in our world in general. I've gotten to go some places as far as the United States. And one of the things that Kelly and I are doing is we're trying to get to as many national parks as we can. And so this morning, I want to talk about a little bit of the last trip that we made to a national park. This fall, we went to Glacier. That was on our to-do list, our bucket list of national parks. And we went hiking. Now, if you're going to go hiking, you have to take a backpack, at least if you're going to do a serious hike. And we did some serious hikes, like for one day our hike, we did a 15-mile hike. Now, the idea with a backpack, though, is you don't want to fill it up with so many things that it's so heavy to carry, but you want to take things with you that might be helpful. So my backpack here, and this is actually my backpack, this is like a raincoat, because in case it rains, you're going to want a raincoat. So that's nice to take with you. A hat, gloves, not a bad idea there, because sometimes it gets cold out there. How about this one? Dry socks. Very, very important. Dry socks, because your feet can get wet out there. What other things do we have here? Layers. You always need layers of clothing, so you can go with that. Oh, this is a good one. This is a headlamp. Some trails, either because of heat or the distance of the trail, you need to get out there in the morning where it's dark. And this is really pretty cool. Look at how that lights things up there, okay? So I won't shine it in your faces there. Headlamp. It gets even more important. Snacks. You have to take snacks with you, right? So whether it's granola bars or protein bars, you could take a map with you. Oh, here's more snacks. You could take a map with you if that's helpful. Really, what's more helpful than a map is you actually take your cell phone with you, right? And your cell phone is what you need in case you get lost, because you can download the app All Trails. And if you don't have All Trails downloaded on your phone, it needs to go right next to Church Center, okay? Church Center and then All Trails and YouVersion, the three most important apps ever. You need to have those. It also serves as a nice camera. And so you can use your phone as a camera. But you need to take this backpack with you if you're going to hike and adventure in new places. I use that as an illustration this morning because we've been talking about new places in this series, Braving the New World. And maybe this world isn't exactly what we'd pick as our world, because it seems a little crazy out there with the pandemic and with a lot of the tensions and with all the information and disinformation that flies out there and all of these things that we kind of step out there and like, I don't know about this. But we need to pack because we don't really have much choice except to go out into this world and to brave it and to do the best that we can with it. And so for the last 7, 8 weeks or so, we've been talking about things that you can put in your pack, in your backpack, to go out into the world. And so what I wanted to do as we wrap up this series this morning, and Braving the New World, is I wanted to revisit those things, some of those things that we've been putting into our backpack, just as a reminder this morning. The first thing we talked about was perspective. We need to pack perspective. And the perspective is simply this, that as crazy as our world may seem, that we have a God who is in control. Absolutely. Always has been. There's nothing that's caught him by surprise here, and there's nothing that's threatening him in our world. And so we can lean into that, and we can have confidence in that. We can also remind ourselves of the fact that this world, as it is not our ultimate destination. In fact, we live in the kingdom. And so as we look at some of the crazy stuff, we can actually mentally, spiritually, emotionally remove ourselves in a way to say, hey, you know what? This isn't my ultimate home. This isn't the ultimate system I'm going to live in. And so we need to pack that idea of perspective. The second week, Mark talked about this idea of resiliency. If you live in today's world, you're going to get knocked down sometimes. It just happens. I was thinking with this pandemic, I was supposed to be this time last year, I was heading down to North Carolina in a couple of weeks for my nephew's wedding. Well, the wedding happened, but there were only 10 people that went to the wedding, and nobody got to go to it. I think about, so there was kind of that disappointment there. In our family, kids, Luke was supposed to be traveling abroad this semester. That never happened. So there's a lot of disappointment. We've been messed up with work situations, in family situations, and not getting to see people. And there's been a lot of frustration. And so we need resiliency to keep going. And God gives us that resiliency, and he gives us that spiritual strength to hang in there when sometimes it's hard to hang in there. We talked also about this idea of discernment. In fact, we talked about it for 3 weeks because it's such a big deal. It's something that we need to pack if we're going to brave this new world. And it comes down to this. Discernment is simply learning to ask good questions. Because if you can ask these good questions, you can sort through what's true and false, what's right and wrong, what's good and what's better and what's best. Mark talked about a couple of weeks ago about the idea of discipline and how important that is to keep going and to just do the right thing, especially when we're dealing with monotony and fatigue and some of these things that have been part of our story here for a year. And just, we need that discipline and how God gives us discipline in our lives. We talked about conviction, that we have to hold on to truth because truth is what keeps us steered in the right direction. And last week we talked about deference. The simple idea that I yield my wants, desires, wishes to somebody else for the greater good. The problem with all of these, and there's not really a problem with them, but my concern with all of these is they sound a little bit defensive or a little bit reactive, like, okay, we're out there in this scary world and we need all these things if we're just going to survive. Because I don't think that's really the approach that we should be taking. These things are not designed to help us survive. They're designed to help us thrive. They're designed, actually, to help us adventure. And so as we stand at this world today that's different maybe from what we expected, and maybe even different from what we might choose, I want to say this. We need to stand here today and say, okay, we're good. Bring it on. Because of all these things that we can lean into. Because I think there's a temptation right now to look at our crazy world and to shrink back and to run and hide a little bit, to find our monastery or to become like Christian hermits, and we kind of fold up into our shells and into our cocoons, and we're like a little bit of like, and we kind of get brave enough to run out, and then we run back in, and we run out, and we run back in, and I don't think that's the way that God intends for us to live. It's not like we're going to step out in this crazy world, and it is crazy, and catch it somehow. Where all of these things that we would say, well, that's wrong, and that's evil, and that's hurtful, and whatever like that, that if we go out there and get too close to it, it's somehow going to infect us. It doesn't work that way. Not when we know Christ. And so we can't just come together in our holy huddles. We need to step out, not retreat, but to advance. Not to avoid, but to engage, and to go out and win the day. This is our opportunity. This is our chance. This is our time. And all of these tools are designed to help us succeed in that endeavor. And there's one more that I want to share this morning that I think really puts the bow on the package, as it were, and helps us understand how to engage in our new world, and that word is engage or engagement. And so this morning we're going to look at the book of Luke, chapter 10. I encourage you to turn there and read along a story that's told here by Luke. Luke chapter 9, right at the very end of that passage, Jesus had been out teaching and had been going from place to place, and 3 different people came up to him and asked about becoming one of his disciples. And each one of them had a little bit of an issue, though, of a reason why, like, I want to be your disciple, but I need to take care of this. I want to be your disciples, but I have this concern. And in all 3 cases, Jesus is like, you know what, I don't think it's going to work for you to be a disciple. And then it turns into chapter 10 here. The page turns. And we read this, after these 3 episodes that Jesus had with these individuals who weren't quite willing to give it all up to follow Jesus, after this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. And he told them, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Go, I am sending you out like lambs among wolves. And maybe that last phrase sounds a little bit scary, but by the time we get to the end of this passage, we find out that there was no reason for them to be afraid. But Jesus was telling these 72 people, and who are these 72 people? We don't know. They were the disciples or the followers of Jesus. It may have included the 12 disciples that we talk about all the time. That's unknown. Maybe just adding 60 more to them. It could have been 72 completely different people there. It was probably a mix of people who are outgoing and people who are introverted, of people maybe who are educated and maybe people that weren't educated, of old and of young, maybe even of men and of women, because we know that women were actually the followers of Jesus as well. But he sends them out there, these 72 people. But what is the word that shows up in each of these 3 verses here that's repeated? The Greek word is the word that we get apostle from, but the English word is what? And it shows up here in 3 different forms of the same idea, and the word is sent. He sent them out 2 by 2. He told them, asked them to send, the Lord of the harvest to send out workers, and then finally says, I am sending you out like lambs among wolves. And the idea is this: they were the sent ones. And we, as Jesus followers, disciples ourselves, are to be the sent ones. Now, typically we think of disciples as being followers. And when we think of followers, we think of, somebody's in front of us and we're following along behind them. What Jesus is saying here is, do you want to be my follower? Stop going behind me and get out in front of me. And go into these villages and towns, because you need to tell everybody that I'm coming. And so it's what he said is, you're the sent ones. And this is a theme that Jesus hits repeatedly in his ministry while he's on earth. If you look at Matthew chapter 10, there's a similar story told to this, but it's just with the 12 disciples who are sent out. But Jesus said, I'm going to send you out to do this. If you look in John chapter 17, Jesus is praying for his disciples, but he said, I'm not praying that they be taken out of this world. I'm praying that they be in this world and have impact, because I'm sending them into this world. In John 20, verse number 21, he says this: as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. Matthew 28, the Great Commission says what? Go into all the world, or literally, as you are going. And so Jesus' intention for his followers is to be going. In Acts 1:8, he says, you've received power and go to the ends of the earth. You can't get to the ends of the earth while you're sitting where you're sitting. And so Jesus' ministry and Jesus' message and Jesus' movement is to be about going into the world. We are the sent ones. All of us. Ordinary people like these 72. And if you could meet those 72 today, you could probably find somebody a lot like you. Maybe in the same station of life, maybe the same personality, maybe the same viewpoint. Because sometimes we look at this and we say, oh, Jesus is sending us. I don't know if that really fits me. It fits everybody. He picks 72. It's a pretty broad range, and we are the sent ones. Where are we sent? Well, he tells us in verse number 2 there, we are sent into the harvest. Now, this was figurative and not literal. He was not calling them to be farm laborers and giving them bags or baskets and said, here, go pick the fruits or the vegetables or whatever. He was saying, hey, I'm sending you out here into this field, and it is ready to be harvested. But what he's talking about is, I am sending you into a spiritual environment here where you can have impact and where you can have effect. And this is one of the primary tasks for us as Christ followers, is to go into the harvest. And what is the harvest? It's the world we're living right here, right now. And that's what our identity is to be, that of harvesters. And our destination is supposed to be the fields. And Jesus is saying, let's go. I'm picking you 72, so let's go. So he sends them into the harvest. And then it says in verse number 4, do not take a purse. Jesus is saying this. Do not take a purse or a bag or sandals or a backpack. I added backpack in there. And don't greet anyone on the road. His point here, more than anything, is get where you're going. And when you get where you're going, you're going to have what you need. Don't stop to have conversations and dilly-dally and kind of waste your time. Just get where you're going. So when you enter a house, verse number 5, first say to this house, peace. If someone who promotes peace is there, your peace will rest on them. If not, it will return to you. Stay there, eating and drinking whatever they give you, for the worker deserves his wages. Don't move around from house to house. When you enter a town and are welcomed, eat what's offered to you. Heal the sick who are there. It's a pretty big instruction, isn't it? Heal the sick. And tell them that the kingdom of God has come near to you. Or in other words, tell them Jesus is coming, or Jesus is here, actually. He's going to be coming to your town. But look at that again. What did he tell them to do? He's sending them into the harvest with these instructions. Go to their towns, stay in their houses, eat at their tables. And since you think about the fact that there are 36 teams, I don't think they were moving around a whole lot. If they hit 36 different towns, that's a lot of towns, isn't it? I'm sure in Metro Detroit here we can come up with more than 36 towns, but you think about kind of a rural and agricultural world, how many towns were there? I don't know. But they were just kind of to go and settle in. Find a place that'll take you. If they'll feed you, great. You know, they'll give you a bed, and you just kind of make that your headquarters for the time being. But the point is this. They were, and we are, to engage with our world. We are to engage with our world. They were sent on a mission, and this mission was just not to 72. It's the mission for all of us who are Jesus followers. We have been sent on a mission, and we don't wait for the world to come to us. Wouldn't that be great? We just put out a shingle that says, you know, Jesus follower here, if you need information, stop in. It's probably not going to happen. That's not Jesus' method, was it? It wasn't that Jesus arrived in Bethlehem and said, I'm here now, folks. Anytime you want to stop by, please feel free. Jesus' method was to go out into the world, and Jesus said to his followers, you're going to do the same thing. And so they went into these places, probably unfamiliar. We think it was into the Transjordan region, which would have been a lot of Gentile people, a lot of Samaritan people. So they could have been going, you know, kind of broadly across the spectrum here in places that they weren't necessarily even comfortable. But the idea was this: you need to go and you need to stay in their houses, and you need to get close enough to these people that they can observe you up close. And that's the concept here. They were to eat meals with them. They were to sit and talk around the table. They were to spend time with them. They were to do life with them at some level. They weren't just to arrive, knock on the door and say, hey, Jesus is coming, be ready, and go on to the next door. And so we need to be reminded of the fact that that's the same for us. Sometimes we make our mission harder than what it needs to be. It doesn't need to be that hard. We just need to engage. But we need to be about engaging with people around us who don't know Jesus, who've never heard the story. And it comes down to simply living life, but doing so intentionally in a very purposeful way. And how do we do that? Well, it's identified for us there in that passage, those verses. But we are to be spreaders of good. Spreaders of good. If you go back there, he says, first of all, when you get to the house, pronounce peace on the house. The idea of this is that you bring goodwill to the places that you go. Goodwill. Where when you walk through the door, you make the environment of that place better. When you walk into work, everybody's like, oh, good, Brent's here. Or when we are invited over to somebody's house and you're like, well, who's going? And well, Jack's going to be there. Oh, good. That's the kind of goodwill that we're talking about, that we become the person who walks into that room and makes that room a better place. We bring peace to the house. We bring peace to the room. And if we're going to be Jesus followers and the sent ones, we're sent and we carry what? We carry goodwill. Where we go. That seems pretty simple, doesn't it? To be the person that when you walk in the room becomes a better place. When you walk into the family gathering takes a turn for the better. When you are on the Zoom call gets better because you're the one there. We are to be the spreaders of goodwill. Secondly, we're to be the spreaders of, and I don't know the best word here. I use the word good words, but it's this idea that they just gathered around the table and they ate and they had these interactions and they had these conversations and they had these life moments where they spent this together with people. And involved in that somehow is going to be conversation, I believe. And so I use the term good words, but you could use good interactions. But this nice idea that every person who comes across your path in life, you stop and pause long enough to offer them good. Either by what you say, by words of encouragement, by putting an arm around their shoulder, by a handshake, by an elbow bump, whatever it happens to be. But that you create and spread good interactions or good words. He told them to heal the sick. Now, I don't know that we can necessarily heal the sick, but we can take healing to people, can't we? There are a lot of damaged, hurting people in our world who need some level of healing. And if we can bring in the good word, or if we can just bring in our presence sometimes it's just somebody willing to sit with another person who's going through a hard time. But it's good deeds is what we're talking about. And so we're supposed to be the spreader of good deeds. Now, as I look at that list, it doesn't seem that hard to me. I certainly can be the most positive, the most encouraging, the most cheerful person where I work or my neighborhood or in the class that I'm taking. You know, I can share good words. I can do good deeds. It doesn't seem that difficult to me. And then there's a last one here, and it's good news. They're supposed to say, hey, the kingdom is near, or get ready, Jesus is coming. This was the last step of it. And I think we need to be reminded of that this is the last step. But I want you just for a minute to stop and think about this. What we're called to do, though, is we're called to be spreaders of good. Now, normally I wouldn't carry that in my backpack, but I did this morning. But the idea here is everywhere I go, I spread good. And so I walk into work, and when I walk in the day, okay, I've got good words, I've got good news, I got good deeds, I got encouragement. So I go into the neighborhood, I'm spreading good. That's what we're called to do, to be a spreader of good. So when I go into the class, I spread good news. When I'm on that Zoom call, I spread good news. When I'm watching my kids play sports and I think the referee just blew the call, I swallow that and I spread good words. We are to be the spreaders of good in our world. And what would our world be like if all of us went through our world like this, and everywhere we went, good just sprayed out from us? That's what we're called to do. But don't miss that last step. Good news. We can do all of these things with good words, deeds, good intentions, and good feelings and all this, but we need to stop and say, hey, it's still about Jesus. And we need to be willing to share those good words. Now, that's hard for a lot of people, and I realize that. We're actually working on something right now. We started with this in staff meeting back about, 4 or 5 weeks ago, called Share Your Story. It's just helping people to say, what is your story of coming to Christ, and how can you share that with another person? So this past Monday, we actually worked on this in our outreach team meeting, and we all went around the table and we shared our stories. The elder team has gone through this, where we went around the room and each person has shared his story and what it was like coming to Christ. And this is something that we're going to be working on a little bit later in the spring as an entire church in our small groups. Just helping us to share our story, because that's the most effective thing that you could tell somebody else, is just simply what Jesus means to you. You don't have to have a big sermon. You don't have to have a big, PowerPoint presentation that you pull up on your phone or anything like that. You can just say, well, here's how Jesus has changed my story, but that's what good news is about. Well, we're going to keep reading here. You go down to verse number 10. It says, when you enter a town and you're not welcome, go into its streets and say, even in the dust of your town, even the dust of your town we wipe from our feet as a warning to you. Yet be sure of this, the kingdom of God has come near. Now, you may not like what I'm saying, but it's still true. But the point is this. We can expect opposition. Just remember, though, that it's not personal. You may be rejected. Jesus actually says this in verse number 16. Whoever listens to you listens to me, and whoever rejects you rejects me. Don't take it personal if you go in there and you're trying to spread good, and you get down there and you're spreading good news, and they're like, oh, we don't want anything to do with that. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. Don't get too worked up about that. You're going to experience some opposition. But here's what I like about this. In verse number, we keep reading here, verse number 17, the 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. And Jesus replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I've given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions, to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. Jesus is saying, hey, they came back and said, hey, we saw some really weird things out there. And Jesus said, of course you did. I saw Satan falling, because you know what? The forces of evil are no match for me. And we have supernatural help. And sometimes when we step out of our comfort zone and say, okay, I'm going to take good to this world, be it deeds or conversation or good news, I can go with the confidence knowing that God has got my back. And they went there, and I think they were a little bit surprised. They came back and said, Jesus, we weren't expecting this, but even the demons were afraid of us. And Jesus said, of course they were. I saw Satan falling. They are no match for the gospel, and they are no match for the good news when you're willing to take the risk and go there. I've been reading a book recently. I think it's called Everybody Always. It's written by a guy by the name of Bob Goff, who was a former lawyer out in San Diego, a Christian guy. And it's not a theological book. It's just his big thing is like he wants to take love to the world, the love of Christ to the world. But Bob Goff was a lawyer, went to Uganda, and discovered a lot of really dark, evil things that were going on there, a lot of witch doctors, and discovered that they were actually practicing, they were kidnapping children and sometimes even sacrificing them to pagan gods. And he was like, whoa, that's got to stop. I got to do something about that. And he came across a boy who had been kidnapped by one of these witch doctors and actually disfigured, but had lived through it. And he said, okay, this is our chance. We're going to take this thing to trial. And they went and they found the witch doctor, and Bob Goff, an American, somehow in the Ugandan courts, represented to this young boy, and this witch doctor was brought in, and this witch doctor was convicted and sentenced to life in jail. But here's where the story gets really, really interesting. Bob Goff says, I'm like all about taking Jesus' love to this little boy, and like, what about to this witch doctor? So he went to the prison and said, I'd like to talk to this guy that he had just been responsible for being convicted. And they brought this guy out, and he said, I need to tell you about Jesus and share Jesus' love with you. And that witch doctor became a Christ follower. But when you talk about witch doctors, you're talking about some incredible forces of evil there. And yet, the forces of evil are no match. It's interesting, Bob Goff has gone and tried to meet with and connect with these other witch doctors and said, how do I, what do you need, guys? You can't do this. And they're like, well, none of us know how to read and write. He's like, perfect. So he's actually started schools to teach witch doctors how to read and write. In their curriculum, the book that they use is the Bible. And that's what they're learning to read and write with, because the forces of evil are no match for the forces of Jesus. Well, I kind of rushed through verse number 17, at least the first part there. It said, the 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us. I love that verse. They came back and said, that was awesome. Now, I think probably at the beginning, he says, you know what, I'm going to send you into these things, and you're going to meet strangers, and you're going to have to live in their house, and you're going to have to eat their food, and you're going to have to make friends with them. And probably some of them were like, I don't know about this one, Jesus. I'm a little uncomfortable with that. And they probably went off a little bit tentatively to these towns and went through all that. And yet they come back, weeks later, and Jesus said, how did it go? And they're like, that was so cool. I'm so glad I got to be a part of that. And don't miss this point. Jesus didn't really need them to go ahead. The word kind of got out. He sent them ahead not for his benefit, but for their benefit. And when Jesus asks us to go, he's asking us to be a part of something incredible. He doesn't need our witness. He can figure out ways to do it without us. He chooses to use us in this incredible thing that he's doing, but he sends us for our own good, not for his. Us, plain, ordinary Jesus followers who go out and we spread good deeds, and we spread good words, and we spread goodwill, and we spread good news. That's the plan. That's how simple it is. So we live in this new world, and it's crazy out there, admittedly. Sometimes a little bit scary, and we could shrink back in fear. And let's be honest, this past year has been especially hard, hasn't it? And it hasn't become any easier to become a Jesus follower in the world, but it's become more and more obvious that we need more Jesus followers in our world. And if it's going to happen, it starts with us. We can live in dread, or we can live in despondency, or we can live with courage, and we can live with excitement, and we can live with encouragement. See, God could have had you born at any time in history. You could have been one of the 72, I guess. But he didn't pick you for then. He picked you for now. And you are alive in this place at this moment for this reason. To be the spreaders of good. To take good words of encouragement to people. To take goodwill where you make a place better by your presence and by your attitude and by your outlook. To be good deeds people where we bring healing and help and hope to people. Where we become good news people. Where we share Jesus Christ. Well, there's one last good here that shows up in this story, and I wanted to add this in as we finish up because I want to be super practical here. Did you notice way back at the very beginning of verse 1 or 2 that Jesus sent out the 72 two by two. He said, don't do this alone. Take somebody else with you. So when you're in this weird, odd situation, you're not feeling totally isolated, there's a buddy there. Do you remember back when you were a kid going to camp and they'd stick you in the lake and tell you to swim? But what did they always tell you first? You need to have a buddy. Well, it's the same thing that Jesus is doing here. And so we need to add one more good to our list here, and that's good buddies. People who will tackle this with us. And so here's my challenge to you this morning, all right? Not just to sit here and say, okay, that was good, Brent, but to actually say, you know what, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to be a person this week who's going to be about goodwill. In every room that I walk into is going to be better because I walk into it as a Jesus follower, not as, like you're something special. I'm going to be a person who's about good encounters, and every single person who has an encounter with me is going to be blessed and benefited by that. I'm going to be a person of good deeds. I'm going to make people's lives. If somebody needs a buck, I'm going to give them a buck. If somebody needs a helping hand, I'm going to stop and I'm going to help them. If somebody is really reeling, I'm going to be that person. And you know what? Maybe God will give me an opportunity where I can actually share my story, share my faith a little bit. I'm going to be the person of good news. But don't try to do it by yourself. Buddy up with somebody. So here's what I want you to do to finish up here. I want you to identify somebody in your mind that you'll ask to help you do this or to do it with you. It may just be your husband or it may just be your wife to say, you know what, this week we're going to do this, but then when we have these opportunities, we're going to share them with each other. So there's a little bit of kind of this mutual encouragement here. It may be a friend. It may be even somebody that you work with. It might even be, crazy as this sounds, it might even be somebody who's not a Jesus follower, but you're saying, hey, you know what? This is what I'm going to be about this week. Goodwill, good words, good deeds. Hey, you want to join me in that? And you're like, well, what's this all coming from? Oh, it's something from my church. Well, tell me a little bit more about that. Pick somebody. Who's your person? Okay? If we're going to be serious about following Jesus, let's get serious right here and say, okay, who is this person that I'm going to ask to be my good buddy? And if it's helpful, write it down on a piece of paper if you're taking notes there, or if you've got your phone, just type it in on the notes on your phone. In fact, if you want to be really extreme about it, maybe you could just type in something that says, hey, I've got a question for you, something maybe you could help me with. I'll give you a call in a little bit. Just go ahead and text them. But let's get serious about engaging our world. We've got this pack filled with these things that are going to be helpful to us, but they're going to be helpful to the people around us. But you know what's going to be the most helpful? Jesus. We're facing a new world. We don't have to face it in fear. We can face it boldly with enthusiasm and with excitement because our world needs us. Let's engage. Will you pray with me? God, thank you for this simple story. This got such amazing truth to it. I pray that you would encourage us and convict us where we're just too willing to sit back and to watch the world go by and maybe even to hide from it. God, I pray that you would give us the courage and the determination and the wisdom and the strength and all these other things that we need, but to be spreaders of good. Our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed. My first question is this: if you don't know Jesus, you don't know what good really is. We've sang a lot of songs about Jesus, how he brings forgiveness and freedom. That's what the cross and resurrection are about. But if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, I invite you to start one today, simply by asking him to forgive you, to come into your life, to lead your life. Just tell him that you want to be his follower. If you are his follower, don't forget that you're a sent one. He's sending you. So wherever it is that you live, or wherever it is that you work, or wherever it is that you go to school, or whatever family you happen to be in, you're to be taking good news and good deeds and goodwill, good words. Will you make that commitment today? God, we need your help. But we know that the spiritual, the supernatural, the power, your power, is behind us. I pray that you would give us the courage to take those steps. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for coming this morning. If you stand, put your mask on. It's a celebration of a year of doing this. And realize that we've got some good news on the horizon. Let's go out and let's be spreaders of good. You're dismissed.